For 5 years of marriage, every time Thomas and I were intimate, he would go off afterward to apologize to his one true love. I saw it all but never stopped him. Then at a family gathering, he showed up holding that woman's hand. To prove his love for her, he publicly forced me to take a contraceptive pill. That was the breaking point. For the first time, I, a filial daughter-in-law of the Rivers family, stood up for myself. Let's divorce. If you stay with me, you'll be buying me pills for the rest of your life. My body can't take it anymore. My mother-in-law caught the meaning behind my words. She slapped him across the face and in front of everyone, ordered him to go upstairs with me to make a baby. But I never let him touch me again. Downstairs, lively atmosphere had returned. Thomas came out of the shower, reluctantly tossed off his robe and waited for me on the bed. "Gerald, you must be thrilled right now," he sneered. I said nothing. Instead, I handed him the divorce papers. "Sign these, and you can go book hotel rooms with Jessica as openly as you like." His expression darkened as he snapped back. "I've always treated her like a sister. Don't twist everything in your head to make it dirty." I gav a bitter smile. "Thomas, do you really think I don't know what you've been doing with your so-called sister? 5 years of marriage, and every time you dreamed beside me, you called Jessica's name. Even on our honeymoon, you ditched me halfway to go see her." Thomas froze for a couple of seconds, then decided to drop the pretense altogether. "Yes, I love her. If it weren't for all your pandering to my mother over the years, why on earth would I stoop to marrying some outdated girl from the countryside? 10 years of silent love. 5 years of marriage. I poured my heart and soul into serving the Rivers family. I worked tirelessly, honored my in-laws and catered to Thomas's every whim. I thought he'd eventually feel something for me. Clearly, I was wrong. In his heart, there was only his first love, Jessica. To him, I was just a shallow, conniving woman after status. What scheme are you playing at now?" Thomas's grip tightened on the divorce papers. "I only brought Jess back to visit Grandma, and you just had to stir up trouble in front of everyone to make my mom lose her temper. Just how badly do you want to bear my child?" He was convinced that my call for divorce was a ruse, that my real goal was to have his child, and so he refused to sign. The next morning, Thomas posted on social media a photo of him and Jessica tangled together on a hotel love seat. Clear as day, I saw the faint rows of bite marks along his neck, and the scattered bruises on Jessica's smooth thigh. They were trophies from a night of passion. I was still staring, stunned when my phone rang. On the other end of the line, Thomas spoke with smug satisfaction. "Just as you wished, Jess and I didn't use any protection this time. I promise the Rivers family heir will arrive next year. Just not from you." Outside the Civil Affairs Bureau, I stood in the blistering sun, waiting nearly 3 hours before Thomas finally arrived, arm wrapped around Jessica's waist. The first thing he said was a threat. "You asked for this divorce, so if my family questions it, you'd better take the blame." I looked at his handsome face, feeling nothing for him anymore. "I'll talk to your mother. I'll tell her we split amicably because of personality differences." "No, that won't work." Following his gaze, I saw the woman sitting comfortably in the cafe across the street. It all made sense now. He wanted to use me to pave the way for Jessica, making their future a little smoother. Leaning against the marble pillar nearby, I met his gaze, disappointment overshadowing my exhaustion. "Tell me, what do you want me to do?" Thomas showed not a trace of gratitude. His eyes still brimmed with disgust, but his tone was disturbingly casual. "It's simple. Publicly admit you cheated during our marriage. Take all the blame on yourself. Convince my mom that you were involved with another man, and even had an abortion, which is why you haven't been able to get pregnant all these years. Agree to leave the marriage with nothing. That's it." As he finished, my hand by my side, clenched tight fingernails digging deep into my palm. "We've been through so much as a couple. Do you really have to be this ruthless?" Thomas spread his hands helplessly. "I don't have a choice. If you don't do this, even if I divorce you, my family will never agree to let Jess in. People are inherently selfish, and love or the lack of it only makes it clearer." For Jessica's sake, he was willing to trample me into the dirt, shamelessly demanding that I paid the price for their affair. In the past, I would never have said no to Thomas. If my unconditional compromise could make him happy, I would have followed his every word for a lifetime. But this time, I didn't want to give in. "Of all the conditions you proposed, I'll agree to only one, leaving with nothing." 10 minutes later, we each tucked a bright red divorce certificate into our pockets. 5 years of marriage over. Just like that. Thomas gave me one last glance before looking away. "Even though you didn't fully cooperate, at least the result is good. Finally, the divorce is done. Don't act all high and mighty. Just name your price. While I'm in a decent mood, I'm willing to give you something." I interrupted him just in time. "If we're ending this, then let's end it cleanly. I won't take a single thing that belongs to the Rivers family. Fine, as long as you don't regret it. He turned and walked straight toward Jessica. She pressed a kiss on his cheek, throwing me a look of smug triumph. Before leaving, Thomas waved at me. Cheryl, from now on, let's just be strangers. It was the first time he'd ever given me a genuine smile. I resigned from the company, saying goodbye to my father-in-law, who had always treated me like his own daughter. I declined his generous offer of 50% of the company shares. As compensation, who would have thought I'd run into Thomas as soon as I stepped out? After a week apart, he still looked as tall and striking as ever, laughing and chatting with the younger women in the office. But the moment he saw me, his face turned cold, just as always. Cheryl, how much did my dad give you? I ignored him and walked toward the door. That move clearly stung him. He caught up to me, blocking my way, his tone hostile. So who was it that put on a holier-than-thou act wearing? You wouldn't take a penny from the Rivers family. He sneered. Turns out your target was my dad all along, reeling him in for the big catch. Are we? I looked at this man I'd loved for 15 years, unable to hide my own bitterness. Even if you're kicking a dog, there's no need to humiliate it this badly. Thomas's face shifted uncomfortably, and he quickly backpedaled. Fine, just as long as that's the case. Just then, his secretary came over with a project contract for him to sign. Years of business experience told me immediately that this was a deal that would cost him, not benefit him. But when I saw that Jessica was listed as the beneficiary, I couldn't help but let out a bitter laugh. For the sake of a woman's smile, you're willing to disregard the family's interests? Imagine how heartbroken your father would be if he knew. You don't need to worry about that. Thomas's gaze was like a knife laced with poison, sinking deep into my chest. Divorced now, so stop trying to get close by bringing up my dad every time. Jessica is my future wife. There's no need to talk about giving her a discount. If she wanted my entire billion-dollar fortune, I'd give it to her without a second thought, handing it over with both hands, no questions asked. After he finished speaking, he signed his name on the paper, and then transferred $3 million to Jessica's bank account, right in front of me. Before leaving, he threw in one last remark. Love always feels like a debt you wouldn't understand. I stood there frozen for a long time, as memories flooded my mind like a tidal wave. When I first entered the Rivers family, I was broke at the time. My half-sister was diagnosed with a serious illness, and she needed $3 million for treatment. The Rivers couple, already doing more than enough by adopting me, had no obligation to do more, and I couldn't bring myself to ask for anything else. Thomas, raised in privilege with endless pocket money, learned of my situation and nodded, agreeing to lend me the money. But the day before my sister was scheduled for surgery, Thomas suddenly backed out. I still remember his exact words. Sorry, I bought a gift for a friend's birthday, so I don't have the money to lend you right now. Later, I ended up selling my blood to raise part of the money for my sister's treatment. It was while I was working as a waitress at a restaurant that I ran into Thomas, was proudly wearing an expensive diamond watch, all smiles as he wished Jessica a happy birthday. To Thomas, I had always been nothing more than a tool to get back at his family. My sister's life wasn't even worth considering. My father-in-law and he had grown distant, and whenever they tried to talk, it would end in a fight after just a few words. Years ago, he entered my room in the middle of the night, sweet-talking me into sleeping with him, and afterward he begged me to marry him, all part of his plan to sabotage my father-in-law's intention to adopt me as his daughter. In the end, he succeeded, but I was the one who became trapped, desperately struggling in his hollow, elusive love. At least now, it was still not too late to let go. 3 months after leaving the Rivers family, thanks to the business experience I had accumulated over the years, and Amelia's constant encouragement, my career began to rise rapidly. My younger sister, who had just graduated from college and started working, moved in with her mother to stay with me. The old place was too small, so I bought a bigger house. Coincidentally, Thomas and Jessica's new home was just 2 floors above mine. The next day, I was woken by a knock at the door. When I opened it, I saw an unexpected visitor. I looked at him coldly and asked, "What is it?" Thomas glanced at me with disdain, clearly irritated by my indifferent attitude. "Aren't you going to invite me in?" he asked. "Is this your way of playing hard to get? My home doesn't welcome you." Thomas had never been turned away from my door before, and he never expected me to speak to him with such a cold attitude. In the past, if he had taken a single step toward me, I would have been overjoyed, unable to sleep all night. "Stop pretending. Even if you stayed here for the rest of your life, I wouldn't spare you a single glance." I frowned, confused, and asked, "You didn't actually think I moved here because of you, did you? Isn't that the reason?" He stormed into my house with absolute certainty, smashing the potted plants I had just arranged in my room into pieces. Of courtesy, I stood at the door, waiting for him to vent his anger, before coldly pulling out the property contract. As far as I know, you and Jessica only moved into this neighborhood yesterday. Well, I bought this place 2 months ago. Thomas took the contract and glanced at it. The date was exactly as I had said. Who moved in first was now crystal clear. There wasn't the slightest hint of embarrassment on his face. If anything, he became even more relentless. Then you move out. Why should I? I stood my ground, staring him down. Thomas immediately gave me a scrutinizing look, his eyes narrowing as he sized me up. Living so close, are you sure you won't go mad? Watching me and Jess be all happy and in love in front of you. Every day? Over time. You might lose your mind. I smiled. Don't flatter yourself too much. I'll live just fine without you and I'll live better. The only question is, will your little lover stay loyal to you forever? Don't be surprised if one day she sells you out, and you're there counting the money for her. If the seemingly invincible heir Thomas had a weakness, it would definitely be Jessica. Brooke's family had fallen on hard times years ago, and it was only through Jessica's sacrifices to Thomas that they managed to cling to any semblance of stability. Everyone knew Jessica was ambitious. She pretended to be devoted and faithful on the outside, but in reality, she used Thomas's money to support a whole string of male models. The only person who was kept in the dark was Thomas, who year after year remained deeply devoted to her. You can talk about me, but not her. With those words, Thomas slapped me across the face. Without a moment's hesitation, the fiery pain from the slap made me see this man clearly once again. He was nothing short of a beast. I slammed the door shut, staring at the mess in the room, a reflection of our lost marriage that could never be salvaged. From this moment on, I promised myself I would never shed another tear for him. But Thomas didn't seem to agree. Living in the same neighborhood, with nothing more than a floor separating us. The next day, I got into my car, ready to head to work. At some point, Thomas had gotten into my car without my noticing, and had already been waiting, just like countless times before. He ordered me to drive him to the gym first, then turn around and take me to the office. I found it laughable. Yesterday he slapped me, and today without so much as an apology, he was ordering me around like a chauffeur. Get out. I refused so firmly that Thomas was clearly taken aback, his eyes flashing with surprise. Do you not love me anymore? Once I loved him more than I loved myself. When I wanted to be good to someone, I'd have gladly given him the world. But Thomas had taken advantage of my love, using it as a license to hurt me without restraint. Yeah, just seeing you now makes me irritated. I answered him with obvious disgust, ready to drag him out of the car. Just then, Thomas's phone rang. It was a call from the hospital. He quickly listened to the explanation on the other end. I didn't catch all the details, only thinking to myself that I needed to get him out of my car, so I wouldn't be late for work. But the next second, Thomas' eyes reddened, suddenly pulled me into his arms. The air inside the car grew instantly suffocating. Thomas's fingers dug into the fabric of my coat, his grip trembling with a frantic, desperate energy I had never seen in him before. His chest heaved, his breathing ragged as he buried his face into the crook of my neck. For a fraction of a second, a phantom ache flared in my chest, the muscle memory of 15 years of devotion. But it died just as quickly, replaced by a cold, hollow detachment. Cheryl, Jess is bleeding, he choked out, his voice cracking. She fell the stairs, the baby. They said she might lose the baby. I can't drive. My hands won't stop shaking. You have to drive me, Cheryl. Please. I sat perfectly still, my hands resting calmly on the steering wheel. I didn't wrap my arms around him. I didn't offer a single word of comfort. I simply looked out the windshield at the gray morning sky. Get out of my car, Thomas, I said, my voice flat and even. He stiffened, slowly pulling back to look at me. His eyes were bloodshot, rimmed with tears of genuine panic. What did you say? I said get out. I turned my head to meet his gaze, my eyes completely devoid of the warmth he had taken for granted for 5 years. Your girlfriend's medical emergencies have nothing to do with me. If you can't drive, call an ambulance or call an Uber. But get out of my car before I call the police for trespassing. Thomas stared at me as if I had suddenly grown a second head. To him I was still the obedient, faceless shadow who would swallow her own tears to make his life easier. Cheryl, did you not hear me? Jessica is pregnant. She is carrying the next heir of the Rivers family. How can you be so heartless? Is your jealousy really worth a human life? Her child is not my responsibility, I replied, unlocking the passenger side door with a sharp click. Just as you are no longer mine. You have 10 seconds. You've really changed, he sneered, his panic briefly morphing into the familiar, ugly arrogance he always weaponized against me. You're bitter. You're pathetic. If anything happens to my child today, I will make sure you pay for your coldness. I'll take my chances. Now get out. With a harsh curse, Thomas slammed his fist against the dashboard, threw the door open, and stumbled out into the cold morning air. He didn't even bother to close the door behind him. I reached over, pulled it shut, locked it, and put the car in drive. As I pulled out of the parking lot, I saw him in my rearview mirror, frantically trying to hail a taxi while pacing the sidewalk. My heart didn't flutter. My hands didn't shake. I felt only a profound sense of relief. The heavy, suffocating fog of the last 15 years was finally clearing. At the headquarters of Summit Innovations, the atmosphere was buzzing. After leaving the Rivers Group, I hadn't let myself wallow. My close friend and business partner, Amelia, had helped me establish a boutique consultancy firm, specializing in supply chain logistics, the very department I had silently run and optimized for the Rivers Group while Thomas took all the credit. Cheryl, the quarterly reports are in, Amelia said, walking into my office with a stack of folders and a beaming smile. She dropped them onto my desk and leaned against the edge. Since we secured the logistics contract for the Northern Port expansion, our valuation has tripled. The board at Vance Enterprises wants to discuss a long-term partnership. I looked up from my laptop, a genuine smile breaking across my face. Vance Enterprises? The logistics giant? The very one, Amelia said, her eyes shining with pride. They've been watching you. They know you were the brains behind the Rivers Group's golden era. Now that you're free, everyone wants a piece of your expertise. How does it feel to finally be recognized for your own mind, President Cheryl? It feels like breathing for the first time, I admitted softly. For 5 years, I had worked 18-hour days under the table, drafting proposals, negotiating with difficult suppliers, and restructuring failing departments. Also, Thomas could present them to his father and receive a pat on the back. I had hidden my own light to keep his burning, believing that my sacrifice would eventually earn me his respect, if not his love. What a fool I had been. Speaking of the Rivers Group, Amelia's tone shifted, growing cautious. Have you heard the news? I don't keep up with them anymore, I said, opening a new spreadsheet. Well, the word on the street is that Thomas's new joint venture with the Brooks family, the one he signed last week, is already in deep trouble. Apparently the Brooks family's overseas shipping lines were heavily leveraged. They used Thomas's signature to guarantee a massive debt. If they default, the Rivers Group will be legally obligated to cover it. We're talking tens of millions of dollars. I paused, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. I remembered the contract his secretary had brought him the day we ran into each other outside the office. I had warned him. I had told him it was a bad deal, a trap designed to benefit Jessica at the expense of his family. He had responded by signing it without looking and transferring $3 million to her bank account, telling me that love was a debt I wouldn't understand. He made his bed, I said quietly, resuming my typing. He can sleep in it. And that's not all, Amelia continued, lowering her voice. Jessica was admitted to the hospital this morning. The rumors are wild. Some say she fell. Others say she had a miscarriage. But there's a whisper going around the medical circles that the pregnancy timeline didn't add up. My hand stilled again. The timeline. Thomas had bragged to me just yesterday that they hadn't used protection the night before, boasting that the heir would arrive next year. If Jessica was already far enough along to be hospitalized for a severe hemorrhage and threat of miscarriage, she must have been pregnant long before that night. A bitter laugh escaped my lips. Thomas wanted an heir so badly. It seems he might get one, whether it's his or not. Meanwhile, in the VIP wing of St. Jude's Hospital, the atmosphere was thick with tension. Thomas paced the corridor outside the emergency ward, his hair disheveled, his expensive suit wrinkled. He had been waiting for 3 hours. Finally, the heavy double door swung open, and a doctor in scrubs walked out, pulling off his mask. Doctor, how is she? How is the baby? Thomas rushed forward, grabbing the doctor's arm. The doctor looked at him with a mixture of professional detachment and slight confusion. The patient, Miss Brooks, is out of danger. We managed to stop the hemorrhaging. However, I regret to inform you that we could not save the fetus. Thomas felt his knees go weak. He stumbled back against the wall, his face pale. No, that can't be. We were going to have a child. I promised my family. Mr. Rivers, please calm down, the doctor said, checking his clipboard. While it is a tragedy, I must ask you a few questions for the medical record. Miss Brooks's chart indicates she was approximately 11 weeks pregnant. Did she have a history of falls or severe stress during her first trimester? Thomas froze. His mind went entirely blank. 11 weeks? Yes, approximately 78 days gestated, the doctor confirmed. That's impossible, Thomas stammered, his voice trembling. We were only together. He stopped himself, his heart hammering violently against his ribs. He and Jessica had indeed been seeing each other off and on, but Jessica had spent the last 3 months in Europe, supposedly managing her family's art gallery. They had only reunited a week ago when she returned to the country. Before that, Thomas had been living with Cheryl, and while they had been intimate, Cheryl was the one who took the contraceptive pills he forced upon her. If Jessica was 11 weeks pregnant, the child could not possibly be his. Is there a mistake? Thomas gasped, grabbing the doctor's collar. Check again. She was only back for a week. It has to be a mistake. Mr. Rivers, please release me, the doctor said firmly, pulling Thomas's hands away. We performed an ultrasound and a blood panel. There is no mistake. If you have personal matters to resolve, please do so outside the clinical ward. The doctor walked away, leaving Thomas standing alone in the sterile, white hallway. The silence of the corridor seemed to mock him. 11 weeks. The words echoed in his mind like a physical blow. He remembered the faint bite marks on his neck, the bruises on Jessica's thighs that he had assumed were from their passionate reunion. But now, a cold, sickening realization began to settle in his gut. He pulled out his phone, his fingers shaking so violently he almost dropped it. He opened his call history and scrolled past the dozens of missed calls to Jessica over the last 3 months. She had always been busy, at a gallery opening, or sleeping due to the time difference. Just then, his phone vibrated in his hand. It wasn't Jessica. It was his father's personal secretary, Mr. Vance. Thomas. The secretary's voice was grim, devoid of its usual warmth. You need to come to the headquarters immediately. Your father has collapsed. By the time I arrived at the Rivers Group headquarters later that afternoon, the lobby was in chaos. Journalists were gathered outside, and security guards were struggling to keep them from storming the glass doors. I had received a call from Mrs. Rivers, my former mother-in-law. Despite her stern demeanor and her demands for a grandchild during my marriage, she had always respected my work ethic. When she called me, her voice was trembling, stripped of all her usual high society poise. Cheryl, please, she had sobbed. Your father-in-law has heart. The company is failing, Cheryl. Thomas signed a fraudulent contract with the Brooks family. They've drained our primary accounts, and now the creditors are freezing our assets. Richard collapsed during the board meeting. He's in the ICU. Richard Rivers had been the only person in that family who treated me like human being. When I was broke, when my sister needed $3 million for her life-saving surgery, he was the one who had finally intervened and set up a trust fund for her recovery, unaware that his own son had refused to lend me the money. I owed Richard my sister's life. I couldn't turn my back on him. I walked through the VIP entrance of the hospital, bypassing the reporters. In the waiting room of the cardiothoracic unit, Mrs. Rivers was sitting on a plastic chair, looking frail and aged. Thomas was standing near the window, his head in his hands. When Mrs. Rivers saw me, she stood up, her eyes filling with tears. Cheryl, you came. How is father? I asked quietly, walking over to her and taking her cold hands in mine. He's stable, but the doctors say he can't take any more stress, she whispered, wiping her eyes. The Rivers Group, 30 years of Richard's hard work gone. In a single day. All because of that viper. She glared toward the window, where Thomas stood silently. Don't call her that, Mom, Thomas muttered, though his voice lacked its usual bite. He looked utterly defeated, his eyes hollow. Jess didn't know her family's company was in debt. She was used by her father, just like we were. She didn't know? I spoke up, my voice cutting through the quiet room like a scalpel. Thomas looked at me, a flicker of anger returning to his eyes. Cheryl, this is none of your business. Why are you even here? To gloat? To see us ruin ourselves? I am here for Richard, I said coldly. And as for Jessica, you really are a fool, Thomas. You think she didn't know? The contract you signed transferred $30 million of Brooks family debt directly to the Rivers Group's logistics subsidiary. Jessica was listed as the sole beneficiary of the offshore holding company that received the initial $3 million transfer. I saw the contract. I told you not to sign it. Thomas sneered, though his hands clenched into fists. You're just jealous. You've always hated Jess because I loved her. You're trying to frame her to make yourself look like a savior. Amelia. I called out toward the doorway. Amelia walked into the waiting room, holding a thick manila folder. She handed it to me, throwing a look of sheer disgust at Thomas. What is this? Mrs. Rivers asked, looking at the folder. These are the financial records of the Brooks family over the last 6 months, compiled by my consultancy firm's investigators, I said, opening the folder and placing the documents on the table in front of Mrs. Rivers. And these are the private travel and hotel logs of Jessica Brooks during her 3 months in Europe. Thomas took a step forward, his eyes locked on the papers. What are you playing at, Cheryl? Look for yourself, I said. Thomas snatched the documents. As his eyes scanned the pages, the color completely drained from his face. The papers contained high-resolution photographs. They weren't of art galleries or business meetings. They were of Jessica, dressed in revealing designer clothes, laughing and clinging to the arm of a handsome young man in various luxury resorts across France and Italy. The young man was Leon Vance, a prominent male model known for his expensive tastes and lack of personal wealth. The $3 million you transferred to Jessica's account last week? I said, my voice steady and merciless. Half of it was immediately wired to Leon's personal bank account to pay off his gambling debts in Monaco. The other half was used to purchase a luxury yacht in their joint names. No, this is a lie, Thomas whispered, his hands shaking so violently the papers rustled. She loves me. She came back for me. She was carrying my child. Your child. I let out a soft, pitying laugh. Thomas, she was 11 weeks pregnant. She was in Europe until 8 days ago. Unless you have the power to bend time. That child belonged to Leon Vance. Thomas's chest began to heave. He stared at the photographs of Jessica and Leon, kissing on the deck of a yacht bought with his family's survival money. And there's more, I continued, pointing to the final page. The miscarriage she had today. It wasn't from a fall down the stairs. The hospital's toxicology report, which my contacts in administration flagged, shows high levels of chemical stimulants in her system. She was partying at a private club with Leon last night while you were waiting for her at home. They had a physical altercation over money, which led to her injuries. Ah, Mrs. Rivers let out a sharp cry of horror, clutching her chest. My God, what have we done? Richard trusted you, Thomas. You threw away a treasure like Cheryl for a filthy, deceitful street rat. She stood up and, with all the strength she had left, struck Thomas across the face. Slap. The sound echoed through the sterile waiting room. Thomas didn't move. He didn't cover his cheek. He stood there holding the papers, his eyes wide and vacant as his entire reality crumbled around him. The woman he had loved for 10 years, the woman for whom he had humiliated his wife, ruined his family, and betrayed his father, was nothing but a parasite who had used his blind devotion to fund her life with another man. The next morning, the Rivers Group was declared technically insolvent, its stock price plummeting to a record low. The board of directors held an emergency meeting, voting unanimously to strip Thomas of his title as CEO. He was escorted from the building by security, the very building his father had built, the very building where he had once looked down on me as an outdated girl from the countryside. I was sitting in the conference room when the board members came out. Alongside me was Richard's legal representative and the lead investors from Vance Enterprises. Miss Cheryl, the chairman of the board said, bowing his head slightly, we are deeply grateful that you agreed to meet with us. The Rivers Group is on the verge of bankruptcy. If Vance Enterprises doesn't step in to acquire our logistics division and inject liquidity, we will have to liquidate all assets. I am prepared to negotiate the acquisition, I said, my voice calm and professional. But I have 3 conditions. Name them, the chairman said desperately. First, Richard Rivers must retain his 30% founder's shares, with his medical expenses fully covered by the new joint entity for life. Second, Mrs. Rivers will be granted a permanent seat on the advisory board to ensure her financial security. Of course, the chairman nodded quickly. And the third, Thomas Rivers is to be permanently barred from entering any property owned by the Rivers Group or Vance Enterprises. He will hold no shares, no title, and no authority. He is to leave the company with nothing, just as he demanded I leave our marriage. The board members looked at each other, but there was no hesitation. Thomas had ruined them. They had no loyalty left for him. Agreed, the chairman said. We will draft the acquisition agreement immediately. As I signed the contract that officially transferred the core assets of the Rivers Group under my control, I felt a deep, quiet sense of closure. I hadn't sought revenge. I had simply allowed the natural consequences of Thomas's choices to catch up to him. I stood up, smoothed down my designer suit, and walked out of the conference room. As I reached the lobby, I saw Thomas. He was sitting on a stone bench near the entrance, looking like a ghost of his former self. His clothes were rumpled, his hair messy, and he was clutching a cardboard box containing his personal belongings. When he saw me walking out, surrounded by an entourage of executives and assistants, his eyes lit up with a Desperate, pathetic hope. Cheryl, he cried out, dropping his box and rushing toward me. My security detail immediately stepped forward, blocking his path, but I raised a hand, signaling them to wait. Thomas looked at me, his eyes brimming with tears. Cheryl, please. You have to help me. Jessica took everything. She cleared out my personal accounts last night and fled the country with Leon. The police are looking for them, but the money is gone. The bank is repossessing my house. My mom won't even speak to me. I looked down at him, my expression completely neutral. That is unfortunate, Thomas. Cheryl, I was blind, he begged, falling to his knees right there in the middle of the lobby, in front of dozens of employees who had once feared him. I didn't realize what I had. You loved me for 15 years. You took care of me. You tolerated my temper, my mistakes. You were always there. Please, Cheryl. Let's start over. I'll do anything. I'll beg my mom to let you back in. We can get married again. I'll be a good husband, I swear. He reached out to grab the hem of my trousers, but I stepped back, avoiding his touch as if he were covered in plague. Thomas, I said, my voice dropping to a quiet, clear whisper that carried through the silent lobby. Do you remember what you said to me the day we got divorced? He froze, looking up at me with a blank, terrified expression. You told me that love always feels like a debt, I said, a faint, cold smile playing on my lips. And you told me that I wouldn't understand it. You were right. I didn't understand why I owed you my youth, my dignity, and my sister's safety. But now I finally do. Cheryl, the debt is paid, Thomas. 15 years of silent love, 5 years of misery. I paid it all in full. I don't owe you my pity, and I certainly don't owe you my future. No, please, Cheryl. I love you. I realize now it was always you, he wept, his voice echoing off the marble walls. You don't love me, Thomas, I said, looking at him with genuine pity. You just miss having a slave who would bleed for you while you smiled at another woman. But that girl is dead. She died the day you forced her to take that pill. I turned my back on him, not waiting for another word. President Cheryl, your car is ready, my assistant said, opening the glass doors for me. I stepped out into the bright, warm sunshine. The air was fresh, and the city stretched out before me, full of endless possibilities. I climbed into the back of my car, and as we pulled away, I didn't look back at the crumbling empire or the broken man kneeling in its ruins. My life was finally my own, and the road ahead was beautiful.